I mean, it seems to look good. Like, looks fucking clean over here, like this, or whatever the case may be. All right, fuck it. Let's do it. We are live. It is my first time hitting this little live stream. This is Adam Kaplan with the MMA show. And holy smokes, we're on our first live stream and we got our first announcement here. We got Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul. This is absolutely unbelievable. What a crazy fight that is going on. I can't wait for it. Dallas, Texas, August 5th. It's one of those things where, the fight now makes sense due to the fact that Jake Paul has actually lost. Um, what's going on, Bree Bree? Yeah, so when Jake Paul actually lost, against Tommy Fury, now you actually realize that for the first time, it's actually okay for him to backtrack a little bit and go back to fighting a little bit of MMA fighters, because ultimately the reality is that he's not really ready to fight top level competition in boxing, and the best thing that he could do is fight high level MMA fighters. Big star MMA fighters that are on the end of their career and, could maybe milk a little bit of a payday. So that's why I think the Nate Diaz fight is absolutely perfect. So, and they chose such a great venue in Dallas, Texas, because there's so much money to be made in those stadiums, especially if they stack the card. But one thing we know is that Texas Athletic Commission is a little bit finicky and sketch. So, how am I sounding on here? Am I coming in clear? Can everyone hear me? Yo. Yeah, it's clear. Perfect. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so one of the things also with the fact that Jake Paul is going to be fighting Nate Diaz as well is, there was rumors when Ariel Helwani interviewed Logan Paul that actually Logan was going to fight Nate, and that built a little bit of speculation up. So you got to wonder, will we see Logan perhaps on the undercard of a Jake Paul fight? And I think that that would be absolutely massive. I think that that's something that they should figure out. But if that doesn't happen, I think that Logan could obviously headline his own card. But wouldn't it be much better for the numbers and right now the reputation and maybe the pressure of Jake Paul to have some relief off of him by having his brother Logan come to the rescue and maybe be on the co-main event? I think that that would be really, really cool, and maybe perhaps Logan could get an even bigger opponent, and Jake and Nate would lose the main event spot. So that would be pretty crazy too. So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, it's going to be a great fight, an interesting fight, due to the fact that there's a storyline there. Both of these guys hate each other. But at the same time, these guys are masterminds at milking the system in getting us to fork up the money to pay for this fight, when realistically it's not really as high level and as entertaining and beneficial as real boxing that's going on now. But at the end of the day, Nate's got a great name to him. The storylines, the press conferences are going to be great. The face to faces are going to be great also. And like I said, it's the perfect time for Jake to take a step backwards and fight an MMA fighter again, instead of going on this fight a real boxer route, because there are no boxers right now that are of similar skill level but could sell out stadiums and pay-per-views like the former UFC champions or contenders can. So that's why the MMA fighters are absolutely the smart route. And all the people that get butthurt about it, it's like, dude, just sit back and enjoy the show, because that's all this is. If you think that Jake Paul is going to be a world champion, he's not. He's going to get the bag. Everybody who's going to fight him is going to get the bag. So just be happy for them and sit back and watch that. And I really love the fact, and I don't know if any of you guys could believe this, but the fact that Nate said he's actually going to go back to the UFC and go after the title, which we know isn't going to happen, that he's going to get the title. But the fact that he's even thinking about going back to the UFC is absolutely absurd. I couldn't believe that. So that was a pretty big deal in itself. I was pretty happy. to see that Nate perhaps was talking about going back to the UFC because we do love him. He is a good star and a good spectacle. And I think that if he's coming back to the UFC, he's coming back for Conor McGregor, which is absolutely the matchup that we want to see. So, I think that that makes sense too. So, listen, man, if Nate Diaz could go ahead, fight Jake Paul, and then turn around, come back to the UFC, maybe fight Conor McGregor after he fights Michael Chandler. Holy smokes, man. That'll be somewhat of an entertaining year if you're Nate Diaz. So I'm looking forward to that. That should be really, really interesting too. And one thing I wanted to talk about too, which I found interesting, is what's with all the chatter about Pereira going to 205? I mean, the way that I see it is the trilogy is an outstanding thing that should absolutely happen. But seems to me that the UFC and maybe Israel Adesanya want to kind of write off in the sunset off of this great KO victory when in actuality, there's a trilogy knocking at the door. Alex Pereira had a great second round up until the knockout. He was actually winning the second half of the fight, of the second round. In fact, I thought that Izzy was winning the first half once he opened up with his boxing, and then Pereira started to not retreat as much and actually come forward and start to counter a little bit. Dana said he wants Pereira at 205. Yeah, Dana said that too because he doesn't want a risk of him beating Israel Adesanya, the cash cow and one of the great faces of the UFC. You got to think it was a very close match, even the second one before the knockout. So I would be a little bit shocked and surprised if Dana White would be against the trilogy fight because like, look, rushing Pereira up the rankings at 205 might not necessarily be the biggest thing. In 205, he's not going to be necessarily the biggest guy in the weight class. Sure, he's a big guy, but Jamal Hill, Magomed Ankalaev, all of these Rakic, all of these guys are very big fighters. So I don't know. Quite frankly, I think that the trilogy should absolutely happen. I think that Pereira deserves it, and I think that it'd be a great matchup. And I think that if that knockout doesn't happen, that what if moment, you wonder how the rest of that fight goes. So why not have a trilogy? That's what I think. So I think the whole chatter of 205 is a little bit of a scapegoat to kind of protect the fact that Izzy should be the champion in the face of the UFC. But quite frankly, I think that they could afford to milk another big middleweight bout because there's really not a whole lot for Izzy to fight with unless he's going to wait for Dracus du Plessis to become a more formidable opponent and contender so that they could do the event in Africa. Now that would be spectacular. But how do you guys see Dracus doing against Israel Adesanya? I see it being a complete shellacking. I see it being a one-sided fight. I think Izzy is much better than him. You see, that's an interesting point, and I agree with that. I actually think that the best matchups that Pereira could have entering the 205-pound division would be Khalil Roundtree. Then they would move to Ryan Spann, and then they would go to Nikita Krylov. That to me would be a great order in terms of building him up for the upper echelon. A big mistake would be giving him a guy like Paul Craig who could hit like a flying triangle, but would get absolutely murked on the feet. Izzy starches Dracus, absolutely, 100%. Pereira at 205 is very interesting when it comes to takedowns. In the first Izzy fight, MMA, he was defending multiple takedowns, probably due to his size. Yeah, probably due to his size. You also have to understand that Izzy isn't necessarily the most dense person. So when you're feeling him in the wrestling and in the exchanges, there is a difference in strength, and I think that because Alex is so dense and he's such a heavy guy. I think that ultimately, and Izzy's wrestling isn't like that great. I think that that's what posed definitely for some difficulties. But I don't know, man. I think that if Pereira gets in there with the wrong guy, even Jan Blachowicz could easily take the fight to the ground and keep his opponent down there. So, that should be an interesting one. I don't really understand what the whole rush is about the 205 thing. Chimaev is on there saying that he wants to fight Izzy next. I absolutely don't think that that's the play. I love Chimaev versus Paulo Costa. Then I love Chimaev versus Robert Whitaker. I think that those are the next fights to make. And then we could perhaps talk about Chimaev fighting for the title. I'm just writing out a post right now saying that I'm live on YouTube to get a little more folks in here. But What do you think about Chimaev fighting Costa and then fighting Whitaker and then perhaps a title bout? If you ask me, I think fighting Costa and then Whitaker for a route to the belt, I couldn't think of a more terrifying and harder route to get there. But it's one of those things. Also, though, with the 205-pound division, where 1 second we're talking about it like, it's not really that interesting. We have to bring more fresh blood into it, and whatever the case may be. But then at the same time, Jamal Hill is a very exciting fighter and a very exciting champion, and I think that he poses for a lot of good matchups. Some folks were asking if there's a possibility that we could see Jamal Hill versus Israel Adesanya. I just don't think that that's going to happen. First of all, I think that they're friends, and second of all, I don't necessarily think that. I just don't necessarily think that it's in Izzy's best interest to go back up to the 205-pound division. I think that he kind of showed what was a little bit at store for him when he was in that weight class. Obviously, Blachowicz is a bit of a tough matchup, but let's be real here. I think that Jamal Hill is a tough matchup for him too. He's a bigger guy. He's a dense guy. Yeah, they would go blow for blow, but I think that Jamal Hill would have a tendency to find a way to bring the fight to the ground. So let's see what my man Josh is saying. If they want to keep busy, uh, if they want to keep busy, why keep him busy? This is a terrible matchup for him. He'll get taken down at will, it's not the right matchup at all. I think that Izzy should be in no rush to take this matchup whatsoever. Izzy could absolutely bulk up. I mean, he's got that frame, he's got that money now to pay for the chefs and the personal training and whatever. I think a 205 move could absolutely happen, but you got to think the guy has such a bright career ahead of him in probably Hollywood, podcasting, content creating, probably acting as well. And then on top of that, maybe even doing some influencer boxing and celebrity fights. You got to think like how many more fights does he actually need in the UFC as it is, as crazy as it sounds. So those are all interesting things. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was the Jorge Masvidal fight. I mean, I'm just happy at this point that he retired. I think that it's one of those things where he's a fan favorite. He had a legendary 2019. He really has nothing left to prove. If you're talking about Masvidal, I believe that as well. Izzy doesn't really have much to prove either, but Masvidal, it was a really great career. I think that it's insane how if that 2019 year doesn't happen, he is not necessarily a multimillionaire and one of the faces of the UFC. I mean, if you think about it, he's one of these guys who not only was able to turn around his career and have an emphatic knockout against Darren Till, who was a popular fighter, and then go on to beat Ben Askren, who everybody basically rooted against him because it was going to be a wrestle fest. He ended up nullifying that by catching that flying knee right away. And then after that goes on to beat Nate Diaz, who obviously, again, was two at the end of his career. But let's be honest here. Masvidal put on a very one-sided performance, and there was no wrestling whatsoever. But it's just crazy because Masvidal was known for having a couple wins, then losing a close split decision against a really good opponent in a main event slot or an important slot. And then, against Darren Till, he was losing the fight. And then what happened is that there was a sequence that they had been training that Tyron Woodley had actually shown him in the training room, because Tyron Woodley did float around with ATT also in Coconut Creek. And there was a sequence with some very fast, explosive footwork where you're switching from orthodox to southpaw. And essentially, Woodley was drilling that movement. And then after a while, Masvidal just kept drilling it and practicing it as well, and he was able to fucking get it off against Darren Till, and it was an insane knockout in London, England, and that's what started the three-piece Minnesota incident, because he interrupted Leon Edwards's interview. Leon Edwards interrupted Masvidal, and then in the end, Masvidal walked up to him with his hands behind his back, hit him with a blindside punch. introduced the three piece in the soda, then hit the flying knee, introduced the super necessary. Not only did he give us emphatic knockouts and great highlight reels, but he also had sound bites on sound bites on sound bites. He was such a likable guy, doing the throat slash. He was on camera with that crazy smile with Megan Olivey when he was wearing the Versace bathrobe. He was just able to turn his career around in such a great way. And it was really just nice to see how, a guy like Jorge Masvidal, who could have rode off in the sunset with not having maybe millions of dollars and a reputation and all of these crazy things, was able to turn it around in 2019. I became a fan in MMA, so I missed out on 2019 Masvidal. Bro, you missed out on 2019, 18, 17, 16, 15. The guy's been throwing down for a long time. People don't realize that he had a very close fight with Benson Henderson when I believe Benson decided to fight Masvidal up. No, actually, I believe it was at 155, but Masvidal actually fought. Um, Masvidal actually fought Benson Henderson in Korea because Benson Henderson's mother is Korean, so he wanted to fight there. They had a very close fight. That's a big name and a big one of the best champions that the UFC has ever seen in Benson Henderson. Masvidal went to, I believe, a split decision with him. He had that very, very close fight with the name is escaping me, Al Iaquinta, which most people say that he won, and then Al Iaquinta had the famous speech. You have to go and watch it if you haven't. Al Iaquinta starts going to the crowd, "You're booing me, get the fuck out of here, fuck you, blah, blah, blah." He starts going off. It's a crazy soundbite. Most people have Masvidal winning that fight. So a lot of people only think about the 2019, but they don't realize that he's been a great fighter. He had a great career in Strikeforce as well. Guy's been around the block for a very, very long time. And it's just nice to see a guy like him going out on his own shield and knowing when to hang up the gloves, because let's be honest here, Gilbert Burns was finding a home for that right hand, and it was starting to get a little bit scary. And I don't like to see when a fighter is getting tagged and he's antagonizing the opponent to just search for that knockout. I don't like that at all. I think that it's one of those situations where you're basically showing your hand where you don't have anything for the opponent. And to me, that's a very risky and dangerous game. So, it's a little bit of one of those things where it's bittersweet, but we don't take into consideration enough how sad it is when we watch some of our favorite fighters fall out of their prime. Our favorite basketball players, our favorite hockey players. Like, if you look back in hindsight, it was kind of sad watching Michael Jordan probably playing for the Washington Wizards. You know what I'm saying? Um, it's just not what it used to be. And I think that when you're looking at some of the greatest fighters in the world, and they're just, especially in MMA, relying on their notoriety and their entertainment and their promotion value to draw in the fans, when we all know damn well that the skill level isn't quite there anymore, it gets sad and it gets dangerous. So I'm glad that Masvidal didn't get knocked out and he was able to go out on a shield. I thought that that was really great. And that was though a good fight. But Gilbert Burns is in a tough spot now because Gilbert Burns is a really good fighter, but he's maybe not necessarily the company's favorite in terms of wanting him to be champion next. And there's a lineup right now. I mean, there's Colby Covington, there's Bilal Muhammad, then there's Gilbert Burns. And Dana White was almost mocking Gilbert Burns when Gilbert Burns was saying, like, all right, you want to be the backup fighter for Leon and Colby? Like, go right ahead. Like, almost making it like, go and strain your body to cut weight when, like, you're not going to get the shot. Like, go ahead. It's like, meanwhile, Colby goes and flies over to England, and the guy's like the next best thing since sliced bread. And he should absolutely get the title shot. To me, that makes no sense whatsoever. I don't agree with that at all. And it's kind of one of those things where, you start to think, like, sometimes the favoritism in the UFC is a little bit way too obvious. But, like, I'll be real with you, man. Gilbert Burns is a great fighter. Would love to see Gilbert Burns and Colby Covington. Would love to see Gilbert Burns and Leon Edwards. And whether or not maybe they fought in the past, I don't have their records right in front of me. These guys are all at different points in their career than they once were. And a guy like Colby Covington might actually be on the decline. He might be getting this performance similar to a Masvidal situation against Usman, when, quite frankly, he has no business and no chance of winning this fight unless he gets lucky. Colby Covington is not known for knockout power. So it's going to be a lot tougher and a lot more of a difficult task to fight with Leon Edwards if he's not going to utilize that wrestling, because we don't know if he's a step behind. He's not necessarily that consistent as of lately. So we'll see. I think a lot of people are a little bit scared at the same time of Leon fighting Colby, because they think that Colby might just run through him. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Leon Edwards puts on a good performance against Colby Covington? Because I think that, one thing that Usman really showed when he went on his tremendous run was how he was able to stick to a game plan. And we were able to see, especially in the second fight, that Leon Edwards is able to do the exact same thing. And I think a champion that is able to stick to a game plan is always the most dangerous ones, not always the most entertaining, but definitely the most dangerous. So I'm looking forward to it, because I think that Leon Edwards could definitely get it done. And I would love to see Leon beat Colby Covington. I think that it would be really, really great. So anybody got any questions? Want to let some fly? We'll see the dealio here. It's my first stream, by the way, so hopefully I'm doing a good job. I've done Instagram and stuff, but YouTube's a little bit different. Colby versus Edwards will be competitive. I mean, of course it'll be competitive. It's a title fight, so absolutely, for sure. For those of you that don't know, I'm going to be on TSN 690 Montreal's Instagram live tomorrow, which is really cool because it's a local radio station, and TSN is obviously attached to the Canadian version of ESPN, but it's like their breakfast radio segment. So I'm going to be on that at 2 o'clock tomorrow. So if you're going to be on at around 2 p.m. Eastern, just stay tuned for my Instagram page, because that's where I'm going to be at. I'm going to be spitting game to TSN radio. And then the next thing you know, I'm going to be next to Stephen A. Smith. Could you believe it? I think Colby wins 90% of that fight. Too relentless with cardio and takedowns. I completely agree with you, Josh. But one thing I'm wondering is the inactivity going to be a difficulty? Is competing in London, England going to be a difficulty? Is Leon Edwards going to be able to chop him down with the leg kicks and the calf kicks? And, most importantly, will Colby Covington be able to impose his wrestling? That to me are all the questions that really come into play. So I'm looking forward to that. I know I've said that 100 times, but I get all happy pappy about this stuff, because without these fights, then I have nothing to talk about. I have no content, or whatever the case may be. And one thing that kind of rises to the occasion as well as a thought to me is like, what's up with Sugar Sean, man? Kind of fine, like in between fights. He's got the podcast, he's got good content, he's got the reels. But I find I don't understand why he doesn't get as many interviews done in between camp. I think that he's one of those great superstars that tends to really only pop around his fight time. And I think that that's a great PR move, because it's not always good to necessarily be so accessible. But sometimes I feel like we forget about Sugar in between his fights. And I think that he's one of the more special fighters in the bantamweight division and in the UFC right now. But I also think, to an extent, that maybe a quiet Sugar Sean is the smart thing, because if you look at the pool of sharks that he has to swim with right now, um, he's not necessarily a shark in the scenario. He's another type of species. Maybe he's like a tiger or something. I don't know, man. A tiger in the water surrounded by a bunch of sharks. It's like a win-loss scenario here. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but I think that Sugar has a great career ahead of him. He's got a tough matchup in fighting the winner of Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo. But I really think that if Henry Cejudo could get it done against Aljamain Sterling, I think that the buildup of the fight will be absolutely insane. I think that there's a better storyline there with Henry Cejudo and Sugar Sean, just because Henry knows how to play the game in a way where Henry's even had to, like Colby Covington, hurt his own character and become his own worst enemy in order to be able to sell fights and get things done. So that's what's interesting about Henry Cejudo. He's gone the cringe route, similar to a Colby Covington, and I think that that's what makes him the more interesting opponent than the likes of Aljamain Sterling. So who do you guys prefer Sugar Sean to fight, Aljamain Sterling or Henry Cejudo? I gotta say, I would prefer Henry Cejudo, but I would prefer Aljamain Sterling from the sense of he's been with the company without retiring, aka he didn't take a break in between. He's looked better and better with every fight. And Aljamain Sterling was one of these guys that was going on the MMA hour with a fake gold chain, and now he has his real estate license. He's buying properties. He's the UFC champion. Another guy that you can't. He has great content. He's a podcaster. Another guy you can't help but be happy for that they're taking this opportunity and they're creating things with it. And that, was the great ally Quinta, Ray Janelle, who's a real estate agent as well, who brought Aljamain Sterling into the real estate game. And that's another great thing too. Fighters helping fighters after their career to make sure that these guys are financially secured after the fact. And I think that that is just such a great thing, which is why I love Aljamain Sterling, and he's such a great interview and a great fighter. And yeah, his style might not be that entertaining with the whole backpack thing, but man, is it lethal? Man, is it intense? When you are getting backpacked like a guy like Aljamain Sterling, whose legs are literally could be used like arms, it is a dangerous, dangerous game. Can you imagine preparing for 12 weeks to then have this guy whispering in your ear for 15 to 25 minutes? It's like being in jail and dropping the soap. Not good. See some of the comments. I think Colby is the better fight and build up, but I think Aljo beats Henry. How do you think Aljo beats Henry? I think Aljo could beat Henry by backpack, but at the same time, I mean, that's Triple C, baby, Olympic gold medalist. Do you really think that he could out wrestle the Olympic gold medalist? I don't know. I don't know. I think Henry is the better fighter, but I think Aljo be yeah for Sean. Yeah, I get you. I get you. Yeah, that's interesting there. So it's just looking very cute tonight. My guy, looking cute, baby, looking fly. Camera's looking lit though. No, production seems to be looking good. How am I sounding? Am I looking fresh? Am I looking fly? Yeah, but it's again. I think that the next step for the UFC right now is to keep building on some of these stars. They get a guy like Joe Pfeiffer in here with a great story, gets on the mic after a big win, cuts a great promotion. These are the guys that they have to get under, and everyone's busy ripping on the UFC with slight delay though. Okay, slight delay, like with the voice and the audio. Like I look like a movie. But one of the things that Aljo is unorthodox with the scrambles, and I feel like Aljo could find the back in those scrambles 100%. And the scrambles is where Aljamain Sterling thrives the most, and that's where Henry Cejudo is going to have to be the most on the ball. But going back to what I was saying before, very minor. So maybe it's just you. Maybe you're delayed. One thing, psych. But one thing that I was wondering is like actually, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying before I asked about Aljamain Sterling? Sad. Mm, anyways, we're just gonna go. But yeah, people are ripping the UFC, Endeavor for buying the WWE. People think that like now the UFC owns the WWE. It's not the case. Endeavor owns the UFC, and now they own the WWE. And if the UFC doesn't think that there are a lot of things that they could take from the WWE to learn and grow, they're out of their mind. The WWE takes random guys who wrestle around small regional towns in literally no man's villes type of towns with chairs set up 1,500 venues. They take these guys and build them into global superstars. One thing that the UFC as of lately has done a bad thing at doing is building up those superstars when they can't build themselves up. The WWE is a generating machine of popularity, and they know how to boost people, whether it's with boos or it's with cheers. And if they could have a little bit of that help on the documentary side, on the storytelling side, on the production side, I think that they would have a really good, big success. And one thing that they need to start doing is the UFC needs to start sitting down with fighters on the roster, and maybe not necessarily the ones they deem as volatile, and maybe they deem as not maybe necessarily their A-list side, But I think what the UFC needs to start doing is every week on Fight Pass releasing more documentaries, releasing more one-on-ones. And you know what a problem might be too is that it's not UFC Fight Pass that should be the outlet that it happens on. So I think that the WWE, a couple of tongue twisters tonight, fellas and ladies, but I think that the WWE could improve some of the storytelling and the promotion of some of these UFC fighters. There's no reason in my mind why Sugar Sean shouldn't be somebody that's talked about every week in the headlines. You know what I'm saying? And maybe I'm being a little bit too critical, but I kind of find that the UFC kind of relies on the fighters to tell their own story. Why is it that I only find out some of these things from these fighters when they get on the mic after a big victory or when they get in front of the media? Why is it only then when I find out these things? We should be knowing the gut wrenching, the heart wrenching stories, the emotional stories, the ones that pull on our heartstrings. When the great Jamal Hill gave that speech against with Ariel Hawani on the MMA Hour, just saying, "All I want to know is have that one question answered. All I want is that one question answered. If I have it to be a world champion, if everything that I've prepared and dreamed and worked for is going to be in front of me, am I going to rise to the occasion and do it?" And I'll be honest with you, before that, I didn't care for the fight at all. I think that Jamal Hill, like Apollo Costa, this is a hot take that I'm going to say, like a Billy Q, like Apollo Costa, like a Pereira. A lot of these guys are famous online because, they Billy Q interacts with like a lot of like content creators and fans and shit like that. But a lot of these guys are almost like popular because they say joke shit or they get caught in like funny moments with memes and stuff. And Jamal Hill was like another guy that just looked like to me like he was building popularity the other way with the TikToks and the this and the that. When he cut that promotion, it made me believe in him and want him to win and want to watch him fight more than any of his fights combined. And that's why I think that working with the WWE is important because they could help generate that promotion machine that I find sometimes the UFC does lack on. And, right now, if Dana White is focusing more on power slap and some of these things, which I find is not as popular these days, I guess they're in the off season. But like I said, I think it's a great deal for the WWE. I think that they could take from it tremendously. And let's be real here. I think that there's a ton of superstars in the UFC that could absolutely head over to the WWE and help some of these guys with multiple things. For example, their choreography and their move set. Hey, if Conor McGregor or Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was able to go down to the WWE Performance Center and show some of these wrestlers some, kickboxing and boxing and taekwondo and a little bit of jujitsu and wrestling and setups and escapes and good finishing moves, bro, you best believe it would be pretty exciting. You know what I'm saying? So I think that both of them could benefit greatly. But let's be honest here. We're always talking about the forefront in terms of the WWE superstars, the Vince McMahons, the Dana Whites, and the fighters. It's all about the suits that are working in the back that it's going to come down to. So we'll see what happens there. It should be an interesting one. But I guess my only worry is like when a company starts to own too many things, sometimes it could water things down. So we just got to make sure that the right people are at the helm. And right now with Dana White and Vince McMahon and Triple H and Nick Khan and whatever the case may be, I think the right people are at the helm. So that's important right there. I'm having fun with this, man. I got three folks in here. We've had about five or six drop through. We've been going for about 35 minutes now. I mean, this is fun. This is fun. If anybody has any questions they want to chime into, don't think too hard. Oh, I don't know what to ask, blah, blah, blah. Just fucking ask anything. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, I think I just booted myself to the I think I just booted myself. Uh I assume that I think I have like a 30-minute time lapse in here or something because I'm using a free version or whatever. I never been into the WWE much, so I don't know how much this will affect the UFC. It's not going to affect the UFC much at all. It's more of the behind the scenes stuff, like I said, that I think they could generate from a little bit of the production, a little bit of the storytelling, the documentary team, stuff like that, whatever the case may be. So that should be interesting. This Saturday, we have Max Blessed Holloway versus Arnold Allen. What a crazy fight. I mean, man, if you look at the resume of Max Holloway, like aside from Alex Volkanovski, this guy's an animal. This guy's on, and, Dustin Poirier, this guy's an absolute animal and he's on absolute fire. But Arnold Allen, I believe, is on a 13-fight win streak. He's undefeated in the UFC. He had a crazy performance against Dan Hooker. The only sad part is we didn't get to see him perform against Calvin Kattar due to the knee injury. And that to me was a heartbreaker because that was really a moment for Arnie to showcase where he's at in the division. But it didn't happen. But luckily, the UFC did the right thing and gave him his matchup. And I was happy about that. And it's going to be a great fight, but a lot of folks are saying like we got to worry about Max Holloway because they feel like there's some early on, he's slurring his words, they don't like the way he's sounding, they think he's sounding a little bit slow. Arnold Allen is a dense guy. He's a country fella from England. He's in good shape. He's not taken a lot of damage in the UFC. Max Holloway is a beautiful car, but with a lot of kilometers on it. And I think that the youth of Arnold Allen in there and the explosiveness is absolutely going to be the difference. So I'm looking forward to it. 36 minutes. I'm not going to be a pig. I'm going to cut it at this. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I appreciate you. Whoever's the last person in here, I think it's Fish or Tyler. Thanks so much. And everybody who tuned in, stay tuned. Whatever.